Hi, good morning. Coach Crazy Cat live with you from Bird Farm in South Carolina. A little bit rainy today, so I moved inside to the barnfest. Anyway, so we're going to be reading from 2 Samuel today, and it's kind of a long reading, chapters 13 to 21. And the reading plan actually had these days split up with some Psalms in between, but the story kind of flows all together. So you remember in the last reading, David had committed adultery with Bathsheba, had her husband Urriah the Hittite killed, took her in as his wife. And God was not pleased. And he said, I'm going to repay you. And someone else is going to take over. You're going to have a fight between your own children. And so one of them is going to come and sleep with all of your wives because that's what you did to someone else. And it's going to be in front of everybody. I'm sorry about that. My cat's acting crazy. I don't know what's wrong with her today. Anyway, so I'm going to read from days 134, 136, and 138 all together because the story all flows together. And I got into reading and I just couldn't stop. So I figured that maybe you guys felt the same. So let's go to the Father so we get out of this what he wants us to get. Father God, I praise you for your beautiful word and for all the lessons and for the many, many things that we can learn from spending time in your amazing scripture, Father. You answer our questions about life and frustration and the daily crazy things that are going on. And you remove anxiety and stress and fear and replace it with peace and love and joy. And I'm just so grateful for you, Father. And I just pray that if anyone's listening, and they don't know you, that they would answer the knock on the door. It's the best thing that they can ever do is letting you inside and then start to read. And I just praise you, Father, for your love and your mercy and your strength and the promise of an amazing future with love and joy and peace forever. I can't wait. Amen. All right. So here we go. 2 Samuel 13. So you'll remember that David had slept with Bathsheba, committed adultery, had Urriah the Hittite killed. They completed the battle, and now they're back home. And after this, it came to be that Absalom, son of David, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Amnon was distressed even to become sick because of his sister Tamar, for she was a maiden, and it was hard on the eyes of Amnon to do whatever to her. And Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shema, David's brother. Now, Jonadab was a very wise man. We're going to question that in a second, but anyway. And he said to him, "Why are you the sovereign's son, becoming thinner day after day? Explain to me." And Amnon said, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." And Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be sick. And when your father comes, say, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me food. And make the food before my eyes so I see it and eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon laid down and pretended to be sick. And when the sovereign came to see him, Amnon said to the sovereign, "Please let Tamar, my sister, come and make a couple of cakes before my eyes, so I may eat from her hand." And David said to Tamar sent Tamar to the house, saying, "Please go to the house of your brother Amnon and make food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house while he was lying down, and she took dough and kneaded it and made cakes before his eyes and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and turned them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Make everyone go away from me." And they all went out from him. And Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the bedroom that I eat from your hand." And Tamar took the cakes, which she had made, and brought them to Amnon, her brother, in the bedroom. And she brought them to him to eat. And he took hold of her and said to her, "Come and lie with me, my sister." And she answered, "No, my brother, do not humble me, for it is not done in Israel. Do not do this wickedness. And where could I take my shame? And you would be like one of the fools in Israel. Now please speak to the sovereign, for he would not withhold me from you." So it sounds like she's willing to marry him and to do things the right way, but he wouldn't listen. So he would not listen, and being stronger, he humbled her and lied with her. And Amnon hated her exceedingly, so all the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Arise and go." And she said, "No, for this evil of sending me away is worse than the other you have done to me." But he would not listen to her. And he called his young man serving him and said, "Now put this one out away from me," and bolt the door behind her. And she had a long coat, for the sovereign's maiden daughters wore such garments. And his servant put her out and bolted the door behind her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her long coat that was on her and put her hand on her head and went away crying bitterly. And Absalom, her brother, said to her, has Amnon, your brother, been with you? But now keep silent, my sister. He is your brother, and do not take this matter to heart. So Tamar remained in the house of her brother Absalom, but was ruined. And the sovereign David heard all of these reports, and he was wroth. And Absalom spoke to his brother Amnon, neither good nor evil, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had humbled his sister Tamar. And it came to be after 2 years. So I'll pause here because there's a 2-year break. So all of this happens, and then there's a 2-year period. So first off, at the very beginning, Absalom is the third son. Is that right? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out which one is which. It's from 2 Samuel 3. I'm going to go back there because I can't even read my own notes. 2 Samuel 3. So this is and David's sons. David the first was Amnon. So the firstborn was Amnon by Ahinoam the Yisra'ēlites, and the third was Abshalom, and he was of Geshur, which is going to be the place that he's going to run to. So the third son was Absalom, and his sister was Tamar, and Amnon was the oldest. Obviously not a very nice person to treat his sister as such, and to feel like you could take advantage of somebody in this way and then just send him off. He's not a very nice person, and Absalom is going to take matters into his own hands. So you can see in verse 21 that David's unhappy and he's angry about it, but it's not recorded that he does anything. And Absalom waits 2 years, and then he decides to take care of it himself. So verse 23, and it came to be after 2 years that Absalom had sheep herders in Baal Hatzor, which is beside Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the sons of the sovereign. And Absalom came to the sovereign and said, see, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the sovereign and his servants go with your servant. But the sovereign said to Absalom, no, my son, let us not now go, lest we be too heavy on you. And he urged him, but he would not go, and he blessed him. And Absalom said, if not, please let my brother Amnon go with us. And the sovereign said to him, why should he go with you? And Absalom urged him, so he let Amnon and the sons of the sovereign go with him. And Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, watch, and when the heart of Amnon is glad with wine, I shall say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not be afraid. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and brave. Then the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the servants of the sovereign rose up, and each one mounted his mule and fled. And it came to be, while they were on the way, the news came to David, saying, Absalom has stricken all the sons of the sovereign, and not one of them is left. And the sovereign rose up and tore his garments and lay on the ground. And all of his servants stood by with their garments torn. And Jonadab, son of Shemiah, David's brother, answered and said, do not let my master say they have killed all the young men and the sons of the sovereign, for only Amnon is dead. For by the mouth of Absalom this has been appointed from the day he humbled his sister Tamar. And now let not my master the sovereign take the matter to his heart to think that all the sons of the sovereign are dead, for only Amnon is dead. And Absalom fled, and the young man who was watching lifted up his eyes and looked and saw many people were coming from the way behind him on the side of the hill. Then Jonadab said to the sovereign, look, the sons of the sovereign are coming, as your servant said, so it is. And it came to be, as soon as he had finished speaking, that look, the sons of the sovereign came, and they lifted up their voice and wept, and the sovereign too, and all of his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmi, son of Ammon, sovereign of Geshur. And David mourned for his son all the day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. Sovereign David then longed to go to Absalom, for he had been comforted concerning Amnon because he was dead. So we have here that Amnon humbles his sister. He's obviously not a very nice person. He was the oldest. And Absalom waits 2 years for his father to do something, but he doesn't. So then he kills his brother. And then he goes in exile to Geshur, which we just read in 2 Samuel 3, that's who his mother was, where his mother was from. So they're hiding him in that land. Chapter 14. And Joab, who is the head of the captains of the army of David, of Tesurah, knew that the heart of the sovereign was towards Absalom. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman and said to her, please pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments, and do not anoint yourself with oil, but act like a woman who has been mourning a long time for the dead. Then you shall go to the sovereign and speak to him according to his word, this word. And Joab put the words in her mouth. And when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the sovereign, she fell on her face to the ground and did obeisance. And she said, Save, O sovereign. And the sovereign said to her, What is your trouble? And she answered, Truly, I am a widow. My husband is dead. And your female servant had 2 sons, and the 2 fought with each other in the field, and there was no one to part them. But the one struck the other and killed them. And see, the entire clan has risen up against your female servant and said, Give him who struck his brother, so that we put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed, and destroy the heir also. Thus they would extinguish my burning coal that is left, and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant in the earth. And the sovereign said to the woman, Go to your house, and let me give commands concerning you. And the woman of Tekoa said to the sovereign, My master, O sovereign, let the crookedness be on me and on my father's house, and the sovereign and his throne be guiltless. And the sovereign said, Whoever speaks to you, bring him to me, and let him no longer touch you. And she said, Please let the sovereign remember Yehova your Elohim, and the Redeemer of blood, not destroy anymore, lest they destroy my son. And he said, As Yehova lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. And the woman said, Please let your female servant speak a word to my master and the sovereign. And he said, Speak. And the woman said, Why have you reasoned like this against the people of Elohim? For in speaking this word, the sovereign is one who is guilty, and that the sovereign does not bring his outcast one home again. For we shall surely die and become like water spilled on the ground, which is not gathered up again. Yet Elohim does not take away a life, but shall devise ways so that his outcast ones are not cast out from him. And now I have come to speak this word to my master, the sovereign, because the people have made me afraid. And your female servant said, Please let me speak to the sovereign. And it could be that the sovereign does what the female servant asked. For the sovereign has listened to deliver his female servant from the hand of the men seeking to destroy me and my son together from the inheritance of Elohim. Then your female servant said, Please let the word of my master, the sovereign, be comforting. For my master, the sovereign, is as the messenger of Elohim and discerning the good and the evil. And Yehova your Elohim is with you. And the sovereign answered and said to the woman, Please do not hide from me the matter which I am asking you. And the woman said, Please let my master, the sovereign, speak. And the sovereign said, Is the hand of Joab with you in all of this? And the woman answered and said, As your being lives, my master, the sovereign, no one turns to the right or to the left from all that my master, the sovereign, has spoken. For your servant Joab commanded me, and he put all the words in the mouth of your female servant. Your servant Joab has done this to change the appearance of the matter. But my master is wise, according to the wisdom of the messenger of Elohim, to know all that is in the earth. And the sovereign said to Joab, See now, you shall do this matter, and go back and bring back the young man Absalom. So Joab fell to the ground on his face and did obeisance and blessed the sovereign. And Joab said, Today your servant knows I have found favor in your eyes, my master, O sovereign. And the sovereign has done the word of his servant. And Joab rose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the sovereign said, Let him return to his house, but do not let him see my face. And Absalom went to his own house and did not see the sovereign's face. And in all of Israel, there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his handsomeness. From the sole of his feet to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head, for it was at every year's end that he cut it, because it was heavy on him, when he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels by the sovereign's weight. And to Absalom there were born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of beautiful appearance. And Absalom dwelt in Jerusalem 2 years and had not seen the sovereign's face. Then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the sovereign, but he would not come to him. And he sent him the second time, but he would not come. And he said to his servants, See, Joab's field is near mine, and he is barley there. Go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab rose and came to the house of Absalom and said, Why have your servants set my field on fire? And Absalom said to Joab, Look, I sent to you saying, Come here, so I can send you to the sovereign to say, Why have I come from Geshur? It was good for me while I was there, and now let me see the sovereign's face. If there's any crookedness in me, then put me to death. So Joab went to the sovereign and informed him, and he called for Absalom. And he came to the sovereign and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the sovereign, and the sovereign kissed him. Wow. So this is 7 years later when Absalom and David are reunited, and Tamar was humbled. And then that was 2 years, and that says 2 Samuel 13 and 23. Absalom was exiled for 3 years in Geshur, 2 Samuel 13:38. And then he sat in Jerusalem for 2 years waiting before he finally said, Dad, I'm sick of this, 2 Samuel 14:28. So it had been 7 years and redemption came, which is really cool because 7 is the number of redemption over and over in the Bible. 7 is completion, redemption. And so Absalom was redeemed and restored to his father, although he's going to repay evil for good, which we're going to see here in a minute. So a couple things. We see that he's handsome, and everybody looks upon him and sees that he's beautiful. We also see that this woman, who's not named, but that she's a wise woman, and wise means believes in God. And it appears that she did, because she gives all the honor and glory to God in this chapter. And what's interesting, because I underline all of the times that the name of God shows up in green. I don't know if you can see that, but this column has a lot of green and the rest of it doesn't. One of the things I really noticed as I was going through is there's a leakage of God being in these pages. And I wonder if that is a reason that they had so much crazy evilness and fighting amongst themselves going on. Because there wasn't a lot of talking to God in this period. David probably felt, really bad about what he had done. And I know whenever I sin, I don't feel as close to God. He doesn't move, but I do. And getting restored to him, he already knows. So I'm like, what am I waiting for? I might as well just, apologize and repent, get on with it. But it's funny how we fight. But anyway, so then you see the green. I don't know that you can see that showing up again on this, in this section about this woman. So she was obviously close to God, or it appears that she was, while the rest of them are kind of running around lost in their own crap. All right, chapter 15. And it came to be after this that Absalom prepared a chariot and horses for himself and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand by the way to the gate. And it came to be, whenever anyone who had a complaint came to the sovereign for a right ruling, that Absalom would call to them and say, "What city are you from?" And when he said, "Your servant is from such and such tribe of Yisra'eel," Absalom would say, "Look, your matters are good and right, but you have no one from the sovereign to hear you." And Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has a complaint or a case would come to me, and I would have right done in their eyes." Right done to him, sorry. And it came to be, whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. So he's acting like he's this little king and start this conspiracy right outside the gate. And Absalom did this to all of Israel who came to the sovereign for right ruling, and Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So over a period of time of doing this, if Absalom's standing there, he's going to have met all the men of wealth and means in the city, in the country, because they over time would have come to see the king. And so he's stealing their hearts. And it came to be at the end of 40 years. So this is David's 40 years. 40 years. Some manuscripts have 4 years. Yeah, it can't be 40 years that he sat outside the gate. David had 40 years where he ruled and reigned in total. So this probably has to be 4 years, I would think. So maybe he did this for 4 years. Absalom said to the sovereign, "Please let me go to Hebron and pay my vow, which I vowed to Yehova, for your servant vowed a vow while I dwelt at Jeshur and Aram, saying, if Yehova indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, I shall serve Yehova." And the sovereign said to him, "Go in peace." And he rose up and went to Hebron. But Absalom, so he's lying here to his dad and saying that he made this vow to God, but he doesn't act very godly. And Absalom sent spies throughout the land, the tribes of Israel. "As soon as you hear the voice of the shofar, you shall say, Absalom is sovereign in Hebron." And with Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited, and they went along unsuspectingly and did not know the matter at all. Absalom also sent for Ahithophel, the Gileonite counselor of David, from his city, from Giloah, while he slaughtered slaughterings. And it came to be the conspiracy became potent, for the people with Absalom kept increasing. And a messenger came to David, saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." And David said to all of his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Rise up and let us flee, for none of us shall escape from Absalom. Go in haste, lest he overtake us quickly and bring evil upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword." And the sovereign servant said to the sovereign, "Look, your servant shall do according to all my master the sovereign chooses." And the sovereign went out, and all of his household at his feet. But the sovereign left 10 women, concubines, to look after the house. So the sovereign went, and all the people at his feet, and they stood at the last house, and all of his servants were passing on his side, and the Kirithites and the Pelethites and the Gittites, 600 who had followed him from Gath and were passing on before the sovereign. So these are the men that have been following him all around, and moved to be with him in Jerusalem as well. So they supported him when he was fighting against Saul and hiding. And the sovereign said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why do you go also with us? Turn back and remain with the sovereign, For you are a foreigner and an exile from your own place. You came yesterday. Should I today make you wander up and down with us while I'm going wherever I'm going? Return and take your brothers back. Loving commitment and truth be with you. And Ittite answered the sovereign and said, as Yehova lives, and as my master the sovereign lives, in whatever place my master the sovereign is, whether in death or life, let your servant be there. And David said to Ittite, go and pass over. And Ittite the Gittite and all of his men and all the little ones passed over. And all the land was weeping with a loud voice, and all the people were passing over. And the sovereign himself was passing over the Wadi Kidron, and which is the river, or the riverbed Kidron. And all the people were passing over toward the way of the wilderness. And see Zadok, which is the Levite, the high priest, came, and all the Levites with him, bearing the ark of the covenant in Elohim. And they set down the ark of Elohim, and Abiathar went up unto the people, completed passing over from the city. I take that back. Zadok is of the Levites, but Abiathar is the high priest. And the sovereign said to Zadok, take the ark of Elohim back to the city. If I find favor in the eyes of Elohim, he shall bring me back and show me both it and his dwelling. But if he says, I have not delighted in you, here I am, let him do to me as seems good in his eyes. And the sovereign said to Zadok the priest, are you not a seer? Return to the city in peace, and your two sons with you, Amatz and Jonathan, the son of Abiathar. See, I am waiting in the desert plains of the wilderness until word comes to you to inform me. And Zadok and Abiathar took the ark of Elohim back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. And David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up. He had his head covered and went barefoot, and all the people who were with him covered their heads, went up weeping as they went up. And David was informed, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Abshalom. And David said, O Yehova, I pray you make the counsel of Ahithophel foolish. And it came to be that David came to the summit when he bowed himself before Elohim and saw Hushai the Archite coming to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. And David said to him, if you pass on with me, you will become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I am your servant, O sovereign, once servant of your father, but now I am your servant, you shall nullify the counsel of Ahithophel for me. And are you not Zadok and Abiathar, the priest, were with you there? And it shall be that every matter you hear from the sovereign's house, you shall report to Zadok and Abiathar, the priest. And with them are their two sons, Amatz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. And by them you will send me every matter you hear. And Hushai, David's friend, went into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. So that takes us to the end of chapter 15. And you can see here that Absalom has been successful in his coup. And he has the people of Israel are following him instead of David. And David leaves the city, probably somewhat out of fear. But he also knew what God had already told him through the prophet Nathan back in chapter 12 after he had committed his sin. Back in chapter 12, verses 9 through 12. And so God comes and speaks, and he says, why have you despised the word of Yehova to do this evil in his eyes? You have struck Urriah the Hittite with the sword, and his wife you took to be your wife. You killed him with the sword of the children of Ammon. And now the sword does not turn aside from your house, because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Urriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus said Yehova, see, I am raising up evil against you from your own house, and shall take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun. For you did it in secret, but I shall do this deed before all of Israel and before the sun. So David trusts God. He knows God. He's a man after God's own heart, and he knows this is going to come true, and that it was predicted to be out of his own house, so he's probably not surprised. And he said, well, let's go. This is the way it's going to be, and if it's God's will, he'll bring me back. So he still trusts God, even though, things are kind of hitting the fan. He's getting thrown out of his castle. He's going to have to go on the run. He's having to take his wives with him, leaves behind the 10 concubines to watch the house. And he takes off. So chapter 16, and David passed on a little from the summit and saw Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth. Remember, Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan, who was lame in both of his feet, that David had taken into his house. And they met him with a couple of saddled donkeys and a couple 200 loaves and 100 cakes of raisins and 100 summer fruit and a skin of wine. And the sovereign said to Ziba, why do you have these? And Ziba said, the donkeys are for the sovereign's household to ride on, and the bread and the summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for the weary to drink in the wilderness. And the sovereign said, and where is your son of the master? And Ziba said, he remains in Jerusalem, for he said, today the house of Yisra'eel is going to return to the reign of my father to me. So after all the good that that David has done for Mephibosheth, he's always looking for an opportunity to return to the reign. And the sovereign said to Seba, see, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. So Seba, who was that ruler who had reestablished Mephibosheth, gave everything to David. And Seba said, I bowed myself to find favor in your eyes, my master, O sovereign. So the head of Mephibosheth's house is trust David and is aligned with David. And Mephibosheth, he's lame in his feet. He's not going to have much without his head guy. But he stays back in Israel. And we'll see later that he's a little distressed. He doesn't shave and he waits and he turns back to David as soon as David shows up. So he's obviously just going to look for the convenience and whatever it takes to stay in his house. When sovereign David came to Bahurim, he saw a man from the clan of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, son of Gera, coming from there. And he came out cursing, and he pelted with stones David and all the servants of the sovereign David and all the people and the mighty one on his right and on his left. And this is what Shimei said, cursed, get out, O man of blood, O man of Belial. Yehova has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Saul in whose place you reigned, and Yehova has given the reign into the hand of Absalom your son, and you were in your own evil, for you are a man of blood. And Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the sovereign, why should this dead dog curse my master the sovereign? Please let me pass over and take off his head. And the sovereign said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? For let him curse, because Jehovah has said to him, curse David, and who shall say, why did you do that? And David said to Abishai and all of his servants, see, my son came from my own body, seeks my life. How much more now this Benjamite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for Jehovah has spoken to him. If so be, Jehovah does look on my affliction, and Jehovah shall return to me good for his cursing today. So this is a really cool story where David has left because he knows God told him, predicted this was going to happen. And then someone's cursing him, and instead of returning evil for good, he's like, you know what, I'm just, maybe God told him to curse me because I'm living through my shame for the evil that I have committed, and it's fine. And God will return good for evil. So it goes to what Jesus said in the New Testament. How many times do you forgive? 70 times 7. And you treat your enemy the way you want to be treated. And that's what David is doing here. As David and his men went in the way, Shimei walked alongside in the hillside and cursed as he went, threw stones at him and kicked up dust. And the sovereign and all the people who were with him became weary, and they refreshed themselves there. And Abshalom and the people and the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with them. And it came to be when Hushai, the Archite, friend of David, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, let the sovereign live, let the sovereign live. And Absalom said to Hushai, who is your loving commitment to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend? And Hushai said to Absalom, no, I am for the one whom Jehovah and this people and all the men of Yisra'eel have chosen, and with him I remain. And besides, whom shall I serve? Should it not be before his son? As I have served before your father, so I am before you. I love this because he didn't really lie. So he's saying that his loyalty remains with the one whom God established, which is David. But then he says that he will serve the son. I love those two verses, 18 and 19. He's very wise, you can tell. So he doesn't lie, but he is able to stay there and spy for David. And Absalom said to Ahithophel, give your advice. What should I do? And Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to look after the house, and Israel shall hear you have made yourself a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you shall be strong. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines before the eyes of all of Israel. And we just read this prediction, remember, in 2 Samuel 12, 9 through 12, where this had been predicted, and he does that, his son. And so he pitches the tent, and he takes them in one at a time so the whole city can see what happened, and everybody would hear that he had defiled his father. And this is a huge insult, a huge slap in the face. He's establishing his power and his rule and his reign to get people to respect him, which seems an odd thing to respect someone over, but anyway. And now the advice of Ahithophel came in those days as if one had inquired at the word of Elohim. So was all the advice of Ahithophel, both to David and to Absalom. This last verse in 16 is an interesting verse. It's showing that God uses evil for his own purposes. So this guy is obviously just self-serving. He's not a nice person, this Ahithophel, but God feeds him this idea to fulfill the prophecy. So in Revelations, you can see angels such as named Wormwood, which is an evil spirit that followed Satan, he's going to use him to turn some of the water to blood. So God can use evil for his own good. He created everything and he can still boss it all around. Doesn't mean that they all listen to him, but he's able to use evil for his own purposes. And this is an example of that right here. All right, chapter 17. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, please let me choose 12,000 men and let me arise and pursue David tonight and come upon him while he's weary and weak. And I shall make him afraid, and all the people who are with him shall flee. And I shall make the sovereign alone and bring back to you all the people. When all return except the man who you seek, all the people will be at peace. And the seeing pleased Absalom and the elders of Israel. But Absalom said, now call Hushai the Archite and let us hear what he says as well. Hushai came to Absalom, and Absalom spoke, saying, Ahithophel has spoken according to this word. Should I do as he says? If not, please speak up. And Hushai said to Absalom, the advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. And Hushai said, you know your father and the men, that they are mighty, and they are bitter in being as a bear robbed of her cubs in a field. And your father is a man of battle and would not spend the night with the people. See, by now he is hidden in some pit or in some place, and it shall be when some of them fall at the first, that whoever hears it shall say, there has been a slaughter among the people who are following Absalom. Even he who is brave, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, would utterly melt. For all of Israel knows your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are brave. But I advise, let Israel without fail be gathered to you from Dan to Bathsheba, as numerous as the sand by the sea, that you yourself go to battle, and we shall come upon him in some place, and when he is found, follow him as the dew falls on the ground, and there shall be left of him and all of the men with him not even one. And if he withdraws into a city, then all of Israel bring ropes to that city, and we shall pull it into the wadi until there is not one stone found there. And Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahithophel, for Yehova had ordained to nullify the good advice of Ahithophel for the sake of Yehova, bringing evil upon Absalom. Hushai then said to Zadok and to Abiathar the priest, Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel such and such, but I have advised so and so. And now send hastily and inform David, saying, do not spend this night in the desert plains of the wilderness, but pass over without fail, lest the sovereign and all the people with him be swallowed up. Then Jonathan and Amatz, who were stationed in Rogel, and a female servant would come and inform them, and they would go and inform sovereign David, for they could not be seen entering the city. But a youth saw them and informed Absalom. So the two of them went away at once and came to a man's house in Barum, who had a well in his courtyard, and they went down into it. And the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth and spread grain onto it, so the matter was not known. And the servants of Absalom came to the woman and said, where are Amatz and Jonathan? And the woman said to them, they have passed over the stream of water. And they looked and did not find them, and returned to Jerusalem. And it came to be after they had left that they went up out of the well and went and informed the sovereign David and said to David, arise and pass over the water quickly, for thus Ahithophel has advised against you. And David and all the people who were with him rose up and passed over the Jordan, and by morning light not even one remained who had not gone over the Jordan. And Ahithophel saw his advice was not followed, so he saddled his donkey and rose up and went to his house and to his city, and he gave command to his house and hanged himself, and he died, and he was buried at his father's burial site. So interesting that he kills himself. The same thing happens to Judas Iscariot, and you read in the New Testament that Satan entered Judas Iscariot, and then he committed suicide. Evil spirits can enter somebody, but they can't leave them until they die. So I wonder, did this guy have an evil spirit in him? It doesn't say, but Judas Iscariot did. And then a lot of times they'll commit suicide after they do whatever they were meant to do. So the spirit can go on and torture someone else. So interesting. I'm not really sure. Obviously, this guy wasn't very nice. We can't see his heart, so we don't really know what he fully believed deep down. But he did a lot of bad things, and then he commits suicide. So anyway, interesting. And David came to Baanum, and Absalom passed over the Jordan, he and all the men of Yisra'eel with him. And Absalom appointed Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Now Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Yithra, a Yisraelite who had gone to Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. So this Amasa, who is appointed the head of Absalom's army, was related to Yithra. Remember, he was like the guy who wasn't very nice. And then David ends up taking his wife, Abigail, as his wife after that guy ends up dying. So pretty interesting. Then Yisra'eel and Abshalom camped in the land of Gilead. And it came to be when David had come to Manum, that Shobi, son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the children of Ammon, and Maker, son of Amiel, from Lodabar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds and basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and flour and roasted grain and beans and lentils and parched vegetables and honey and curds and sheep and cheese of the herd for David and the people who were with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So we have here that Ahithophel had been one of David's, but he turns on David and he gives bad advice, and then he kills himself. And we've got Amasa as head of the army to fight with David. Chapter 18, and David mustered the people who were with him and set commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds over them. And David sent out a third of the people under the hand of Joab, and 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. And the sovereign said to the people, I shall certainly go out with you too. But the people answered, do not go out, for we flee. They would not set heart upon us. Even if half of us die, they would not set heart upon us. For now 10,000 are like us. Therefore it is better for you to support us from the city. And the sovereign said, that which is good in your eyes, I do. And the sovereign stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and thousands. And the sovereign ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, be gentle with the young man Abshalom for my sake. And all the people heard when the sovereign gave all the commanders concerning Abshalom. So the people went into the field to meet Yisra'eel, and the battle was in the forest of Ephraim. And the people of Yisra'eel were smitten there before the servants of David, and the slaughter that day was great, 20,000. And the battle there was scattered over the face of all the land, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. But when Absalom met the servants of David, Absalom was riding on a mule, and the mule went under thick branches of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth and was suspended between the heavens and the earth, while the mule which was under him passed on. And a young man saw it and informed Joab and said, I saw Absalom hanging in a tree. And Joab said, now look, you saw, and why did you not strike him to the earth? I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. But the man answered Joab, though I were to receive 10,000 pieces of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the son of a sovereign, because in our hearing the sovereign commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, take heed, you who go against the youth, against Absalom. Otherwise I would have been untrue to my own life, for no matter is hidden from the sovereign, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. And Joab said, let me not waste time here with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And 2 young men who bore Joab's armor went around and struck Absalom and put him to death. And Joab blew the shofar, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held the people back. And they took Absalom and threw him into a large pit in the forest, and heaped a very large pile of stones over him. And all of Israel fled, each one to his tent. And Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a monument for himself, which is in the sovereign's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the monument after his own name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument. And Ammon, son of Zadok, said, please let me run and take the news to his sovereign, for Yehova has avenged him of his enemies. But Joab said to him, you are not the man to take the news. You shall take the news another day, but today you shall not take the news, because the sovereign's son is dead. And Joab said to the Cushite, go inform the sovereign what you have seen. And the Cushite bowed himself to Joab and ran. And Ammon, son of Zadok, said again to Joab, and whatever might be, please let me run after the Cushite. And Joab said, why would you run, my son? There is no news to bring you reward. And whatever might be, he said, let me run. And he said, run. And Ammon ran by the way of the plain and passed the Cushite. Now David was sitting between 2 gates, and the watchman went up to roof over the gate to the wall and lifted his eyes, and looked, a man running alone. So the watchman called and told the sovereign, and the sovereign said, if he is alone, there is news in his mouth. And he came nearer and nearer, and the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called and said, see a man running by himself. This one is also bringing news. And the watchman said, I see the running of the first is like the running of Ammon, son of Zadok. And the sovereign said, this is a good man, and he comes with good news. And Ammon came, peace, and he bowed down with his face to the earth before the sovereign. Blessed be Yehova, your Elohim, who has surrendered the men who raised their hand against my master the sovereign. And the sovereign said, peace to the young man, Absalom. And Ammon, when Joab sent the sovereign's son and me, I saw a great crowd, but I did not know why. The sovereign said, turn aside and stand there. And he turned aside and stood still. And the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, receive the news, my master, for Yehova has avenged you this day of all who rose against you. And the sovereign said to the Cushite, peace to the young man and Absalom. And the Cushite answered, let the enemies of the master of the sovereign and all who rise against you for evil be as that young man is. And the sovereign was shaken, and he went up to the room over his gate and wept. And as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you, oh, Absalom, my son. So we have here that Absalom is taken out. by a donkey and by Joab, and that David is very sad about it. I'm not sure why the story of these two men running and why the one had to be there first, but it's very interesting. So chapter 19, and it was reported to Joab, the sovereign is weeping and mourning for Absalom. So the deliverance that day was turned into mourning for all the people, for the people heard on that day saying, the sovereign has been grieved for his son. And the people stole back into the city, and the people were ashamed, who are ashamed, steal back when they flee in a battle. And the sovereign covered his face, and the sovereign cried out, oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son. And Joab came into the house of the sovereign and said, today you have put shame on all of your servants today who have saved your life, and the lives of your sons and the daughters, and the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines, by loving those who hate you, and by hating those who love you. For you have made it clear today, you have neither commanders nor servants. For today I know if Absalom had lived, all of us had died, and it would be right in your eyes. And now arise and go and speak to the heart of your servants, for I swear by Yehova, if you do not go out, not one passes the night with you. And that is worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. So the sovereign rose and sat in the gate, and they told the people, look, the sovereign is sitting in the gate. And all the people came before the sovereign. As for Yisra'ėl, they had fled, each one to his tent. And it came to be that all the people were contending throughout the tribes of Israel. The sovereign delivered us from the hand of the enemies. He rescued us from the hand of the Philistines. And now he has fled from the land because of Absalom. And Absalom, who we anointed over us, has died in battle. And now why are you silent about bringing back the sovereign? And sovereign David said to Zadok and to Abiathar the priest, speak to the elders of Yehuda, and said, why are you the last to bring the sovereign back to his house, since the words of all of Israel has come to the sovereign to his house? You are my brothers, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the sovereign? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? Elohim do so to me, and more to you, if you are not the commander of the army before me all the days in place of Joab. Thus he swayed the hearts of the men of Yehuda as one man. So they sent to the sovereign, saying, return you and all of your servants. So the sovereign returned and came to the Jordan, and Yehuda came to Gilgal to meet the sovereign, to bring the sovereign over the Jordan. And Shimei, son of Gera, a Benjamite, who was from Barum, hastened and met the men of Judah to meet the sovereign David. And with him were 1,000 men of Benjamin, and Tisba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants. And they rushed over the Jordan before the sovereign. And they passed over the ford to bring over the sovereign's household, and to do what was good in his eyes. And Shimei, son of Gera, fell down before the sovereign when he passed over the Jordan, and said to the sovereign, do not let my master reckon crookedness to me, neither remember what wrong your servant did on the day my master the sovereign left Jerusalem, that the sovereign should take it to heart. For I, your servant, know I have sinned, and I have come today first of the house of Joseph to go down to meet my master the sovereign. And Abishai, son of Zeruiah, answered and said, should Shimei not be put to death for this, because he cursed the anointed of Yehovah? And David said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you are to be adversaries to me today? Should any man be put to death in Israel today? For I do not know that I am sovereign over Israel today. So the sovereign said to Shimei, you do not die. And the sovereign swore to him. And so this guy who had thrown stones and rocks and cursed him turns his ways once David is reestablished, and David doesn't kill him. He's kind to him in both instances. Verse 24, and Mephibosheth, son of Saul, came down to meet the sovereign, and he had not attended to his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his garments from the day the sovereign went away until he came back in peace. So whether he did that on purpose because he was in mourning, or whether it was because his head guy had left, he hasn't taken care of himself since David came. He's been in a state of stress. And it came to be when he came to Jerusalem to meet the sovereign said, why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? And he said, my master, O sovereign, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I'm saddling a donkey for myself to ride on and go to the sovereign, because your servant is lame. And he spoke slander against your servant to my master the servant. But my master the servant is a messenger of Elohim. Therefore do what is good in your eyes. For all of my father's house were but dead men before my master the sovereign. Yet you, your servant, sat among those who eat at your table. Therefore what right have I to cry out any more to the sovereign? And the sovereign said, why do you speak any more of the matters? I have said, you and Tisba share the land. So he splits the land between the two of them. And so Tisba gets a race. And Mephibosheth said to the sovereign, rather let him take it all, since my master the sovereign has come back in peace to his own house. And Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Rogelim and passed over the Jordan with the sovereign to send him on his way over the Jordan. And Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old, and he had sustained the sovereign while he was dwelling at Mahanaim, for he was a rich man. And the sovereign said to Barzillai, pass over with me, and I will provide for you in Jerusalem. But Barzillai said to the sovereign, how many are the days of my life that I should go up with the sovereign to Jerusalem? I am 80 years old. Do I discern between good and evil? Does your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Do I still hear the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be further burdened to my master, the sovereign? Your servant would only pass over the Jordan with the sovereign for a short distance, and why should the sovereign repay me with a reward? Please let your servant turn back again to die in my own city near the burial site of my mother and my father. But here's your servant Kima. Let him pass over with my master the servant, and do for him what is good in your eyes. And the sovereign answered, Kima has passed over with me. Now let him do for him what is good in your eyes. Now whatever you choose of me, I do for you. Then all the people went over to the Jordan, and when the sovereign had passed over, the sovereign kissed Barzillai and blessed him and returned to his own place. And the sovereign passed over him to Gilgal, and Kimham passed over with him. And all the people of Judah brought the sovereign over, and also half the people of Yisra'eel. And see, all the men of Israel were coming to the sovereign, and they said to the sovereign, why have our brothers, the men of Yehuda, stolen you away and brought the sovereign and his household and all of David's men with him over the Jordan? And all the men of Yehuda answered all the men of Yisrael, because the sovereign is our relative. And why are you displeased over this matter? Have we at all eaten at the sovereign's cost, or has he given us any gift? And the men of Yisrael answered the men of Yehuda and said, we have 10 parts in the sovereign, and David 2. We have more than you. Why did you despise us? Was it not our advice first to bring back our sovereign? But the words of the men of Yehuda were harsher than the men of Yisra'eel. So we've got this reestablishment of the king, and the people coming and bowing down to David and committing to serve him, and he's reestablished as king. Chapter 20, and there came to be a man of Belial, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite, and he blew with a shofar. We have no part in David, nor do we have inheritance, O son of Jesse, each one to his tents, O Israel. And the men of Israel deserted David to follow Sheba, the son of Bichri, but the men of Judah from the Jordan as far as Jerusalem clung to the sovereign. And David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the sovereign took the 10 women, his concubines, whom he had left to look over the house, and he put them in a protected house and supported them, but did not go into them. So they were shut up to the day of their death, living in widowhood. So David was with them no more. They had no more children because of the matter of Abshalom. And the sovereign said to Amasa, call to the men of Yehuda, for within me 3 days, and present yourself here. And Amasa went to call the men of Judah, but he delayed longer than the appointed time when David appointed him. And David said to Abishai, now Sheba, the son of Bichri, is going to do us more evil than Absalom. Take the servants of your master and pursue him, lest he find for himself walled cities and escape. Then the men of Joab went after him with the Kerethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty men, and they went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, son of Bichri. When they were near the large stone which is in Gabon, Amasa came before them, and Joab was dressed in battle armor, and on it was a girdle with a sword fastened with a sheath at his hip. And as he went forward, it fell out. And Joab said to Amasa, peace, my brother. And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him, but Amasa was not on guard against the sword in Joab's hand, and he struck it with his stomach, and his inward parts poured out onto the ground. And he did not strike him again, and he died. And Joab and Abishai, his father, pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri. And a man, one of Joab's men, stood beside him and said, whoever is well pleased with Joab, and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab. And Amasa was rolling in his blood in the middle of the highway, and the man that saw the people stood still. So he moved Amasa from the highway to the field and threw a garment over him. And when he saw that, everyone who came upon him halted. And he was removed from the highway, and all the men passed over after Joab to pursue Sheba, son of Bichri. And he passed over through the tribes of Yisra'eel to Abel, to Bereth Makkah, and to the Berites, and they were assembled and went after him too. And they went and besieged him in the Abel of Beth Makkah, and they cast up a siege mound against the city, and it stood in rampart, and all the people who were with Joab battled the wall to throw it down. Then a wise woman called out from the city, listen, listen, please say to Joab, come nearby, so I speak to you. And he came near, and the woman said, are you Joab? And he answered, I am. And she said, listen to the words of your female servant. And he said, I am listening. And she spake. In former times they often spake, saying, let them inquire of Abel. So they ended the matter. I am of the peaceable and trustworthy ones in Yisra'eel. You seek to destroy a city and a mother in Yisra'eel. Why do you swallow up the inheritance of Yehova? And Joab answered, far be it for me to swallow up or to destroy. That is not the case, but a man from the mountains of Ephraim, Sheba, son of Bichri, has raised his hand against the sovereign and against David. Hand him over alone, and I will withdraw from the city. And the woman said to Joab, look, his head is going to be thrown over the wall. So the woman in her wisdom went to all the people, and they cut off the head of Sheba, son of Bichri, and threw it out to Joab. He blew with the shofar, and they dispersed from the city, each one to his tent, and Joab returned to the sovereign at Jerusalem. Now Joab was over all the army of Yisra'ЄL, and Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and Adoram was over the compulsory labor, and Jehoshaphat, son of Ahud, was the recorder. And Shua was scribe, and Sadok and Abiathar were the priest, and Urriah the Hittite was priest to David. Wow. So we've got the whole fulfillment of the prophecy that was given back in 2 Samuel 12 being fulfilled. David's own house fights against him. Abshalom dies, and then you've got this Amasai guy who's fighting against him, and he dies. So now we've got people in charge of the army who are really after David and trust him and want to follow him. So now we've got a new story that comes out, and this is about a famine in the land and repaying something that King Saul had done. There was a scarcity of food in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David sought the face of Yehova, and Yehova answered and said, because of Saul and his bloodthirsty house, because he killed the Gibeonites. The sovereign therefore called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but they were a remnant of the Amorites. And the children of Israel had sworn protection to them, but Saul had sought to strike them in his order for the children of Israel and for Yehudah. So back in Joshua 9, verses 1 through 19, this was the people who were very smart. They had seen what had happened to Jericho, and they came and pledged allegiance to Joshua. Joshua didn't seek the face of God and for his guidance before they pledged to this little group here, the Gibeonites, to protect them. And once it was sworn, it couldn't be taken back. But Saul did something to them and tried to strike them and wipe them out, which I couldn't find recorded in the Bible except for in this place. So at some point during Saul's rule, he did something to them. And now there's this matter that's kind of hanging that needs to be repaid. So David said to the Gibeonites, what should I do for you? And what do I do to make atonement? So you bless the inheritance of Jehovah. And the Gibeonites said, it is no matter of silver or gold between us and Saul or his house. Neither is it for us to put to death any man in Israel. And he said, whatever you say, I do for you. And they said to the sovereign, the man who consumed us and plotted against us that we should be destroyed from remaining in all the border of Israel, let said men of his sons be given to us, and we shall hang them before Jehovah in Gibeah of Saul, whom Jehovah chose. And the sovereign said, I will give them. But the sovereign spared Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, because of the oath of Jehovah that was between them, between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. So Mephibosheth is going to get spared, but the rest of Saul's are not. And the sovereign took the 2 sons of Ritzpah, daughter of Ai, whom she had bore to Saul. So whether she was a wife or a concubine to Saul, she had 2 sons, and they are handed over, Armani and the other Mephibosheth. And then there were 5 sons that, remember, Merab was the oldest daughter in 1 Samuel 18 is where this is covered. Merab was the oldest daughter, and she had been promised by Saul to David if he killed the Philistines. But Saul reneged on his word and had her marry Barzillai, the Mahalathite, and she bears children. Michal did not bear children, remember, because her heart was just in a different place. She was an idolater, and David couldn't deal with her anymore after she cursed him for dancing to Jehovah. So he put her away, and she was to know no man and not have children. But it looks like that she was bringing up for her sister these 5 kids. Why that is, I don't know. Did they die in the battle with Saul? Were they off living in another land and had her children living in the castle for protection? I have no idea. But anyway, there were 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Mahalathite. So Adriel would have been her brother-in-law because her sister Merab was married to him. And for whatever reason, Michal was bringing up those children, and David takes them away. So I can imagine that she hated David even more after this. And gave them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them on the hill before Jehovah. So the 7 fell together and were put to death in the days of harvest, in the first days in the beginning of the barley harvest. And Ritzpah, the daughter of Ai, took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock from the beginning of the harvest until the late rains poured on them from the heavens. And she did not allow the birds of the heavens to rest on them day or night, or the beasts of the field. But David was informed what Ritzpah, the daughter of concubine of, so she was a concubine. It says it right here. So she was a concubine of Saul. He never took her as a wife for whatever reason. And David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan, his son, from the men of Jabesh Gilead, who had stolen them from the street of Bethel Shan, where the Philistines had hung them up after the Philistines struck Saul and Gilboa. And he brought the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan, his son, from there, and gathered the bones of those who had been hanged, and buried the bones of Saul and Jonathan in the land of Benjamin and Tesla, in the burial site of Kish his father, and did all that the sovereign commanded. And after that, Elohim heard the prayer for the land. And the Philistines were again fighting against Yisra'eel. So David and his servants went with him and fought against the Philistines, and David was weary. And Yishobenab, who was one of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose bronze spear was 300 pieces, who was wearing a new sword, spoke of striking David. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to help him and struck the Philistine and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, saying, "Do not go out with us to battle anymore, lest you put out the lamp of Israel." So David's old and he's tired. I don't know exactly what age he was, but he rules for like 40 years. This is probably getting towards the end of his rule, and he's actually more of an issue, a challenge. They're more worried about him than fighting the battle. So they said, "Go home and we'll fight." And it came afterward. There was a great battle against the Philistines at Gob when Shebekah the Hushathite struck Saph, who was one of the sons of the giant. And there was a battle with the Philistines again at Gob, where Elihan, son of Yereth Ogarim, and Belathim struck Goliath the Gittite, and the shaft of whom spear was like a weaver's beam. So here we had somebody who was related to Goliath. And there was a battle in Gath again, and there a man of great height who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, and 24 in number. And he also descended from the giants, and he reproached Yisra'eel, and Jonathan, son of Shimei, the brother of David, struck him. And these 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. So Goliath had 4 giants as children, and they all die. So there we go. It was a long reading today, but I didn't want to cut the story in pieces just because it's a whole lot easier to get the flow when you read it all together. So God willing, tomorrow I will be reading from some of the Psalms that went along with it. There's various Psalms that are a piece of this, so I will be catching those up before we go back to Samuel. So we'll have 3 days of Psalms to catch up, and I'll see how long they are, whether I do them all tomorrow or whether it takes a couple of days. I don't want to rush it because the Psalms are amazing, but wanted to go ahead and get through this story because it's a really awesome one, and I couldn't stop reading, so I figured probably you didn't want to either. Anyway, with that, be blessed, and let's close in prayer. Father God, I praise you for your beautiful word and for your love and your strength and your mercy and for all you do for us, Father. You're just so loving and kind, and I'm so grateful for the peace that you place into my heart so I can try to stay in a joyful place despite the crazy world in which we live. Fear and stress don't do us any good, and you say that over and over in your word. Just know that you have it. You know what's going on, and that we're going through a place of learning for a reason, Father. I just praise you and all. Amen. All right, everybody. With that, be blessed and have an awesome day.